Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be talking about episodes 635 through 637, which will cover manga chapters 705 through 708. And it's now time for the B block portion of the Corrida Coliseum tournament. So, synopsis, it's now time for the B block round of the Corrida Coliseum tournament as we learn more about all the newly introduced combatants and their fighting capabilities, while Luffy is struggling to keep his identity hidden from those around him, especially those like Bellamy, who already know it's Luffy. Alright, so differences. So there are far fewer major differences in this set of episodes compared to the last three. However, it's still pretty fillery in the sense that there aren't any like huge scenes that are necessarily added, but they're all like very long and they just have really drawn out sequences. And you get the whole meme about One Piece having like a billion reaction shots. And then this set of episodes, you do see a lot of the crowd shots where the camera just lingers on the crowd for no reason other than to pad out time. But there are a couple instances of actual added filler. So the first one is the scene where Maynard is confronted by Bartolomeo. That's all added. In the anime or in the manga, we don't see this interaction, and instead we just skip straight to the moment where Bartolomeo has already beat up Maynard and he just kind of left him in the garbage. And we only get to see Bartolomeo in the silhouette form in the manga at this point too. So we don't actually get our first real look at him until he begins his round in the Battle Royale. Another change was the B block round, of course, has various added scenes of fighting to make it longer, as well as the, like I said, the incessant padded shots of the crowd. And then lastly, the anime actually shows how Abdullah and Jet took down Tank, whereas in the manga we only see them standing over him after he was already defeated. Those are the only three like really big changes that I saw, aside from the padding out of the pacing and all that stuff. But yeah, let's get into the episodes themselves. Right off the bat, confronting Bellamy, Luffy can't remember his name and for some reason calls him Maro. And without missing a beat, Bellamy corrects him, it's Bellamy. And the timing of the voice acting in the anime is amazing here, because in the manga, I didn't quite crack up as much, but when you hear it, I nearly had a spit take the first time I saw this, because it was the timing is so good. And we see that with his arrival in the new world, his bounty has also gone up from 65 million berries back on Jaya to 195 million berries, which means that he's definitely gotten stronger. However, the elevated bounty is not the only thing that's changed about Bellamy. His entire demeanor has changed. He seems to be a little bit more mature, less antagonistic. Even before he mentions that he doesn't really harbor a grudge towards Luffy, we kind of see this play out. This Bellamy was really interesting. I was immediately intrigued by this one version of him because he mentions how after losing to Luffy, he lost his crew on his way to Skypiea, and then decided to, the fact that he just decided to go to Skypiea at all was really surprising, and actually made it, proving that Luffy and Cricket weren't full of shit. And I personally believe that Bellamy also saw that giant shadow of Luffy after beating NL, and realized that Luffy did in fact make it to the Sky Islands, and it kind of changed his entire worldview. Bellamy is yet another person that Luffy beat the crap out of, and had their ambitions taken away, but it was replaced by the ability to dream again. And we've seen this happen with several other characters like Crocodile, who had this sort of renewed sense to go back out and reform a sort of pirate crew and set sail again. The difference, I think, with Bellamy getting his ability to believe and dream again is that while he doesn't outright say it, he seems to passively acknowledge that Luffy was the one to give that back to him. There's that one part where Luffy asks if he hurt any of the Skypians or Shandians when he was up there, and he left it ambiguous with his response. I believe he went there in peace, but to be honest, even if he wanted to try anything, I bet you Wiper probably would have killed him at that time. I mean, he lost his crew, so it sounds like he barely made it there to begin with. And we've also seen through the cover stories that all of our favorite Sky residents are fine, so it seems like Bellamy never really did anything to them. There's one bit of visual storytelling that I really like that the anime does, and it's with his sunglasses, which are obscuring his eyes all the way until he begins to talk about making it to Skypiea. Then that's when they decide to show his eyes through the sunglasses, kind of making them more transparent, kind of indicating to me at least that his statement had a bit more of his real emotions behind it, just showing that he genuinely was affected by all of that, and maybe even showing a sense of, I don't want to say purity, but a little bit more, kind of positive nature to it. And he caps it off by vowing that he'll never laugh at Luffy again, which is a significant moment considering how he mocked Luffy and Zoro and Nami back on Jaya, and just seeing how much he's matured. And later on, we learned that his motivation for entering the tournament was to get back into Doflamingo's good graces and earn an officer's position. We also find out that in order to even get this chance, that he brought back gold from Skypia as tribute. At first, I thought maybe this was the same pillar of gold that the Straw Hats accidentally refused and left behind, thinking it was a cannon for stealing all the smaller pieces of gold. But there's no way Bellamy could have brought that back by himself, since his crew all either abandoned or was killed in that journey. So it must have been one of the smaller pieces that was made. And the thing is like in the manga, this moment isn't really there. This little shot of Bellamy kneeling down with the gold in the foreground, that was an anime added particular shot. I personally really liked this scene and became very interested in what Oda had planned for Bellamy, because it seems that Bellamy has a newfound respect and, dare I say, even a little admiration for Luffy. But the fact that he is still a fan of Doflamingo and is in this tournament for the purposes of probably getting back on his good side may eventually put him at odds with Luffy again, but this time it'll be a very bittersweet one. It's kind of crazy how we went from wanting nothing more than Luffy to beat this guy's ass to now being a little apprehensive about the potential of Luffy having to maybe beat down Bellamy again. And yeah, that's one of the many strengths of Oda, and this sort of, as well as the strength of this long form storytelling structure. It allows us to see these characters develop in huge and unexpected ways throughout the story. As we move on to what Oda refers to as Scene 2, or Law's Caesar drop-off team, we see them discussing where they're headed next with the cafe waiter, when yet another wrinkle in the plan is introduced as we get a new CP division, one that's even more capable than CP9, the mysterious CP Aegis 0, or CP0 for short. These guys are dressed all in white as opposed to the CP9, who are all dressed in black. But in addition, they're all masked for some unknown reason as well, perhaps to keep their identities secret since they are the world government's best intelligence agency. While in One Piece it's spelled Aigis, this most likely refers to the word Aegis, or Aegis. I don't really know how to pronounce it. It's usually spelled Aegis from the Greek myth, which is the shield that Athena and Zeus apparently use from the Iliad. The actual definition of Aegis is the protection, backing, or support of a particular person or organization, which means that these guys serve as the protection of the world government and their affairs. On the other hand, due to some events that were previously established, this might be something Oda came up with not necessarily when he got to Dressrosa, but shortly after Enies Lobby, so it might not entirely have been a spur-of-the-moment retcon. I'll mention why I think this in the spoiler section. I will admit, when these guys were first introduced, I kind of felt like it was kind of a retcon to introduce an even stronger Cypher Pole division. Like, all throughout Enies Lobby, we were told how insanely strong CP9 were, and how they were the ultimate black ops and intelligence unit the world government had. And then all of a sudden, now there's an even stronger one? It's like Oda needed another set of agents to serve the purpose of being the shady underlings of the world government, but with CP9 already defeated, he needed to come up with something to up the ante, so he created the CP0. Or at least that's how it felt to me at the time. We will get more into the CP0 as we learn a bit more about them, even though we actually know very little about them, even currently in the story where I'm at. Skipping ahead a little bit, in Scene 4, Kinemon gets surrounded by a bunch of guys with guns threatening him with Kanjuro's life, recognizing him as a samurai due to his top knot showing out of his hat. And this kind of cracks me up, because why didn't Kinemon just make a hat that was taller for himself? He could make anything he wants. Like, I know earlier in a couple episodes before, his hat came off and people noticed the top knot, but the fact that the top knot still shows through the hat is just absolutely ridiculous. Finally, in Scene 6, back on the Sunny, we get some more character development and insight into Momonosuke as everyone is playing along to Momo playing Shogun to ease his mind on whatever PTSD he seems to be dealing with. And like I've always said, I love moments like this where we see the Straw Hats kind of just hanging out and goofing around with each other, but also caring for others and easing the mind of a child that has probably been through a lot recently. But this fun moment is interrupted by a mysterious and creepy voice coming from the men's dormitory, revealing some weird psychedelic color combination art. And yeah, unfortunately won't really learn much about this in this set of episodes, but we will definitely get into what it is later. With the B block finally starting, we are finally introduced to another one of the main combatants and probably my favorite new character introduced in Dressrosa, the pirate Bartolomeo. This character, I can't understate how much I love this character. He's freaking hilarious, but unfortunately, we don't quite get to see why I like him so much in this set of episodes, but we will definitely get there in future episodes. But first, like the last podcast, I mentioned how many prominent new voice actors have been cast as characters for the Dressrosa arc, and Bartolomeo is yet another character who is portrayed by a pretty famous voice actor, well known to anime fans. And Bartolomeo is played by Shotaro Morikubo, who is easily most well known for playing the genius tactician and shadow jutsu user Shikamaru from Naruto. Bartolomeo also pretty much sounds basically like a douchier version of Shikamaru. Like, he doesn't really change his voice all that much. And he's also the voice of Kadaj from the movie Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, along with many other characters as well. But I won't necessarily go through and list them all. Anyways, unlike many of the other combatants we've seen so far, Bartolomeo's reputation seems to be one of disdain. And in that scene where Bartolomeo throws that baseball up into the sand just to mock them, Cavendish explains to Luffy that he's not just a menace, but he also has an insolent manner. And in English, this isn't really anything special aside from some character exposition, but you will notice that Bartolomeo's epithet is the cannibal or man-eater, depending on the translation you read or watch. And we'll probably be confused by that the more you learn about Bartolomeo, because there's nothing to indicate where this epithet or reference comes from, as he's not an actual cannibal, nor does anything cannibal-like literally or metaphorically. And what this is referencing is a pun in Japanese. So the phrase eating people or hito wo ku means to mock or annoy them. Kind of like how in English we have that phrase, what's eating you when something's bothering you or annoying you. When you see something, or someone who's being bothered by something or someone. So in that conversation, Cavendish says that he also has an insolent manner. In Japanese, he's actually saying, "Ano hito wa kutta taido dakara ne," which literally translates to, he's also got the people eating attitude, thereby explaining where this epithet comes from. It's his reputation for mocking and annoying people with his delinquent attitude towards everything is where he gets that man-eater or cannibal epithet nickname. I definitely feel for the translators on this one, because this one's just, it's I don't know how you would actually translate this to make it make sense in English. Also, one last fun fact about Bartolomeo is that his name is likely a reference to the Portuguese explorer who was known as the first European to set sail around the southernmost tip of Africa, Bartolomeu Dias. Now, getting back to the actual B block round, before the fight, we get the lowdown on the fighters of interest in the B block. Most of them we've already met, but there are two that I want to point out. First is Hack, the fishman, which was surprising to see here, and it seems he's friends with Jinbei, so there's a potential for him to be an ally later on in this arc if he ever meets up with the Straw Hats. And our first official introduction to the long-legged people in Blue Gilly. We've already met the long-armed people with Apu and the people from the Namakura Island, where Brook was sent during the time skip, and his manager, Sakurin, was also a long-armed member. However, this isn't the first time we've actually met a member of the long-legged people. We've already met another one, we just didn't know it at the time. It was Baron Tamago of the Big Mong Pirates back in Fishman Island, as well as in the previous Punk Hazard arc. At the end of this explanation, as usual, Luffy isn't paying attention and asks Cavendish to repeat it all again, to which he gets annoyed at, which, yeah, I completely understand. That scene was pretty funny. And there's also a hilarious scene where Cavendish is flipping through his wanted posters for scouting purposes. And when he gets to Luffy's, it's completely slashed with knife marks. And Luffy's reaction to this is so funny. He's just standing there awkwardly with like thinned eyes, can't you let this go already? And it's the combination of Luffy's eyes and the way Mayumi Tanaka delivers this line all meekly is so funny, because I don't think I've ever heard Luffy sound like this. And it's so, he's like just like pleading almost, like, can't you just let this go? It's so funny. With the B block round finally starting, this is the first one you actually get to see the action play out, so that we can kind of learn the capabilities and fighting styles of several of these characters. The most focused on is King Elizabello II, who I will never not get a good laugh out of with how ridiculous his gimmick is. The King Punch is said to be devastating enough to even take down a Yonko, but it requires him to warm up and prepare for an entire hour. So you see this dude in the middle of the battlefield just shadowboxing the whole time, and it looks ridiculous. This is also the scene where we get to hear Luffy give Cavendish his nickname because he can't remember how to pronounce it, and he calls him Cabbage, following a similar trend of Luffy naming people after food, since that's what's usually on his mind. And it always reminds me of how he calls like Dalton from Drum Island, aka Sakura Kingdom, Donguri-no-san, or the Acorn Man. There's also a joke that the anime cut out where when Luffy calls Cavendish Cabbage for the first time, off screen, or I guess out of the panel in the manga, Cavendish kind of annoyingly corrects him by saying, "It's Cavendish!" But I don't know why they took that out, because it seems like a really like appropriate thing for Cavendish to do is to correct him, considering how vain he is about his sort of reputation and how he's perceived. Unfortunately for Luffy, trouble will come to find him, as Don Chinjiao already has deduced that Lucy is Luffy and has it out for him over a grudge he has with Garp. Luffy unwittingly responds to that, causing suspicion in Cavendish as well, leading to a brawl between all three of them. Luckily, Sai and Boo come in to stop Chinjiao's rampage to prevent them from all being disqualified, and Luffy kind of disappears. Now, getting back to the Battle Royale, there's another unknown masked fighter named Ricky that is getting a lot of attention, and there's a particular moment where you see one of the people in the crowd comment on his unique fighting style of not using a shield and only a sword, and that seems to remind him of someone, but he can't quite remember who it is. And I think the prevailing theory at the time was that this person might be the legendary Kyros, just fighting in disguise for some reason. And I honestly thought that too. I mean, it seemed like that's what's gonna happen too. Of course, we will see who Ricky is and what his relation to Kyros is at a later date. But the last thing I want to kind of talk about is a little bit more about Bartolomeo. Throughout the B Block Battle Royale, he's been shown just laying off to the side, doing nothing the whole time, waiting for everyone else to beat each other up, until he decides to take a piss right in the middle of the fight, which is hilarious in and of itself and wild to do in a battle royale like that. Like, the amount of confidence and contempt he has for all this is just crazy. And Hack, seeing this, eventually confronts Bartolomeo and attacks him, and somehow ends up getting his arm broken without Bartolomeo lifting a finger. And it seems like yet another one of Oda's sort of fake out psychic powers, but we all know by now there's something more to it. And I pretty much guessed what his fruit was at the time, although I didn't guess the name correctly. But since it's that sort of obvious, I guess it is obvious, but it's not. I'll keep that hidden until it's actually revealed, so I won't spoil it here. Bartolomeo is easily the most interesting fighter in the tournament so far. I mean, Burgess and Bellamy are interesting for their history they have with Luffy, but Bartolomeo is probably the fighter that intrigued me the most throughout this early part of Dressrosa. But before we close this episode out, we do have a Panda Man sighting at the 21-minute, 16-second mark of episode 637 in the Crunchyroll version. And we see Panda Man kind of sitting in the lower left-hand corner of the crowd, reacting to Bartolomeo pissing into the moat that's surrounding the battlefield. So keep an eye out for him. I think one thing is clear by now, that Dressrosa has introduced a massive number of brand new named characters, as well as returning old characters. It was always so impressive to me that Oda juggled this many characters in one arc and gave them all distinct personalities and their own motivations. And sure, Oda does kind of struggle under the weight of his own creations, with with this particular arc, as even in the manga, there were some pacing issues with how he had to make sure to serve these characters. And he's not even close to being done introducing characters. But ultimately, I think he succeeded. It's just that the anime exacerbated the slight pacing issues in the manga tenfold in the anime because of the fact that it was starting to catch up. But yeah, we'll definitely talk about those newer characters and some of the ones that haven't been introduced yet. And yeah, the next episodes we'll have to see who makes it out of the B block before we get to Luffy's C block fights. If you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast for updates on when I post new episodes and to see pictures of my manga collection and card collection. And again, just listening to the podcast is enough for support for me. But if you feel like doing some extra supporting, you can support me via my Buy Me a Coffee profile found on the website. But again, obviously not required. As always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to the podcast. Just a small spoiler section of a couple of things I wanted to mention. But if you're not interested in that, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye! All right, so spoiler section. I guess the first thing I wanted to mention is the whole CP0 thing. Now, I know I mentioned that initially it felt like CP0 was kind of an afterthought that he added later on, when it seemed like CP9 was kind of the ultimate Cypher Pole division, where then he just out of nowhere created CP0. But I guess when you kind of look at it from the perspective of the cover story, like the CP9 cover story, you do get a sense that Oda did have a little bit more in mind with the Cypher Pole thing, especially with Spandam and Lucci coming back. And so, yeah, I guess maybe he did have an idea of the fact that there would be another more powerful or more elevated Cypher Pole division with CP0. He maybe may not have the full-fledged idea of it, but he definitely did seem to have more for it. And yeah, and it does seem like it was ever evolving because apparently in Film Red, he never actually had the idea to have Khalifa and Bluno as part of CP0. And it was for the movies that he was convinced to add them into the CP0. So yeah, it seems like an ever evolving thing when it comes to CP0 and how they're used and whatnot. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to mention that. The other thing I wanted to talk about in the spoiler section is the fact that, there's that scene where Momo is teaching Chopper about being a poison tester for the Shogun, and, later referenced in the moments leading up to Oden's death in the flashback in Wano, where we see the Kozuki family were having their food taste tested for poison by the servants, and we saw this back in chapter 971 and episode 972. And when you think about the timing of, again, like how recently Momo experienced all this, it's interesting that he brings this up because that day is probably one of the most difficult and painful days of his life, because that is the day that Oden is executed and his castle is burned down and he had to say goodbye to his mother and sister and fleeing to the future. So yeah, I guess it does. It is nice in the sense that maybe it brought him a lot of comfort because it reminded him of the last sort of calming time with his family. But yeah, I thought this scene, with the context of having seen what happened to Momo, is a little heartbreaking at the same time, despite it being played for comedy. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to mention is in the anime, it shows Elisabello when he does his king punch, that he has the same black lightning with the red outlines as you would see when in future episodes, when it becomes a little bit more concrete about what Conqueror's Haki infused attacks would look like. Usually it has that black red lightning around it, but it's with King Elisabello, it's never confirmed whether he actually has Conqueror's Haki or not. So I found that very interesting. And again, I don't necessarily blame Toei for this. because Oda himself is never clear on what the lightning means, because he seems to use it whenever he just feels like it looks cool. There's not really too much consistency as to like whether the black lightning actually means Conqueror's Haki, or it's just, yeah, it's incredibly confusing, and there's really no set standard for when what sort of visual cues or visual language used to indicate what type of Haki is being used. And so I think this was another situation where it just looks cooler, but it's never really confirmed or established as to like whether this was actually Conqueror's Haki or not, and it still hasn't to this day. And I think there are a lot of moments where we're still very confused. Like again, with more recently with Kobe's Honesty Impact, that also had black lightning, and we're still not sure if Kobe actually has Conqueror's Haki or not. I personally think he eventually will, if he doesn't already have it, because I just don't see someone who has the ambition of getting to the top of the Marines and changing that. Like someone with that amount of ambition, and someone who's essentially like the Garp to Luffy, I think, to Luffy's Roger, that someone like that who has that sort of level of ambition would not eventually have Conqueror's Haki, or if he doesn't already have it. So yeah, it's very confusing, but I just thought I'd point that out because I noticed that in these episodes. Anyways, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about in the spoiler section. So if you hung around, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode. See ya.